Pauline Hanson's One Nation Chief of Staff James Ashby and Spectator Australia columnist Terry Barnes. James, Terry, welcome. The latest inflation figures, I think fair to say, are pretty much dashed hopes of a rate cut later in the year, which is of course going to be a problem for the federal government because going by the budget they put out, they were banking on that before they get to the next election. Now we're being warned of a possible rate hike in August. The chief economist for Deutsche Bank said there is a quote-unquote material possibility of an August hike after, of course, we had the monthly CPI rose to 3.6% for April. That was up from 3.5% in March. What do you make of all this, Terry? I mean, you know, it would be an absolute disaster for the federal government if there was another rate hike. Possibly the worst thing. You thought this week was bad. It's possibly the worst thing that could happen to them.
Well, Caleb, look, I think that Mr Albanese and Dr Chalmers, the Treasurer, have actually staked their entire political hopes on a rate cut, not a rate rise before the end of the year. And I think when you've had two higher than expected inflation figures the last 2 months, I'm actually starting to think, not being an economist though, I'm starting to think though that we could be looking at a rate rise earlier than August, maybe even July. But that's really going to knock the political strategy for the budget out of the water, isn't it? I mean, basically, Jim Chalmers insisted that things were going to get better, but they're going to get worse by all indications. So how he's going to manage that, and especially if his entire political strategy around the budget goes down the tube, is going to be very interesting to see. I think the government's going to be struggling on this front.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying for, I don't know, the better part of 8-9 months now that the next election will be based entirely on interest rates going down, and it will be an election, James, where the government says, you know, you're stuck with us, we got through the hard yards, now we need your support to get the job done. You know, let's stick together, let's see it through, to borrow a line from a 1980s campaign that Bob Hawke used. But we've got some data here of how much people are behind on their mortgages. I mean, you know, everyone knows it's tough. We know that average Aussie families are struggling, but putting up interest rates is just, it's such a blunt instrument that affects a small number of people, about 30% of the population, because of course the rest are renting or either own their homes outright. And those portion of people are the ones that the government needs to back them in to win another term.
Well, the biggest issue here is people don't have disposable income anymore, and all it takes is something as simple as a toothache and a visit to the dentist, and you're out of pocket a couple of $1,000s. Well, you're going to put your health first before you put your mortgage first, and this is why so many new people are entering that delinquency of 30 days, and in some cases they're exceeding 60 and 90, and we're seeing banks record that now. But equally so, we're seeing these interest rates impact upon businesses. We're seeing a record number of people lose their business. The ATO haven't gone easy on people either. They are demanding money out of people who owe the ATO. And so therefore this snowball effect is impacting on businesses as much as it is on households as well. And people are forgetting about the small business out there because they need cash flow. There's not a great deal of cash out there at the moment. So while customers aren't coming through their doors, the banks are certainly knocking on their door simply saying, we want the money. The ATO are doing the same. It's making life very, very difficult, and it rests on the shoulders of this government. Yep,
and I mean, the ATO has been going hard ever since sort of COVID lockdowns finished, and perversely the government probably doesn't mind that, because it's a way for them to get more money, but also it is technically anti-inflationary, because if you're putting people out of business, it means they're not doing business. It's a terrible situation we're in. Now, this story, I cannot get over it. Got this barrister in New South Wales. He's been sacked as the chair of one of the state's major legal committees because he questioned the use of the gender-neutral pronoun MX. Now, I think it's pronounced mux, which sounds like something a New Zealander would say, you know, mux FM or something. But the term mux was used in a practice note for lawyers, and it told them to advise the court, where appropriate, of forms of address such as Ms, Mr, Mrs, Mix, Doctor, Professor, and so on. Now, this fella, Lindsay Ellison, SC, he's a silk, he, on his website, lists his preferred pronouns as hee-haw, ha, 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 on the blue, on the Wardell Chalmers website. So clearly he's a man with a sense of humour. And he makes a lot of other jokes on there about, you know, how he has no desire to play golf or have a work-life balance, and he's got no interest in cars, and he's probably the most boring person you've ever met. He's a bloke with a sense of humour. It's clearly a joke. But he ended up being dismissed from the Succession and Protective Law Committee following a complaint being made. He was in a meeting when he questioned this mix thing, and he was reminded of the Bar Association's LGBTQI principles of inclusiveness. I mean, come on, Terry.
Well, I'd wear that sacking as a badge of honour, to be quite honest with you. I think that'd be the best news ever, being sacked for this. Look, there's going to come a point where a judge is going to be faced by somebody fronting their courtroom, and that person says, my pronouns are Your Honour and not guilty. What are the courts going to do when they're presented with someone who's a smart aleck like that? What are they then going to do? These are the problems. I've had a gutful of these pronouns. As far as I'm concerned, if you look male, you're going to be mate, he. If you're a woman, you're a she. That's as far as it gets. I think the greater public, well, look, I wouldn't go that far, but I think the greater public have had a gutful of this. It's just getting too complicated. We are being distracted from the real issues in this country, and instead of the courts worrying about pronouns, just get on with the caseload and get through the volumes of people that are sadly building up in our court system.
Yeah, well, I think my pronouns are judge, jury and executioner. I think that's what I'm going to go with. Now, Terry, you've had, of course, knife crime has been rampant across the country, big issue recently. New South Wales brought in tougher knife laws in June last year, doubling maximum jail time for carrying a knife in public and all this sort of thing. One person has been jailed in the first 6 months, Terry. What a great success.
Well, you've got to start somewhere, don't you, Caleb? But really, I think when our barristers have a bad case of myxomatosis, as it seems to be in New South Wales, I mean, I think it's law enforcement actually has to focus on getting this right. And as we saw, sadly, in Sydney in April with those two awful incidents, particularly what happened in Bondi Junction. The Australian public, not just a few people, I think the general public wants knife crime to be stamped out, just as we dealt with gun crime back in and gun control back in the 90s. I think it's time that we actually crack down on this. Peter Dutton talked about it in his budget in reply, and he was mocked by Labor. I think he was actually on the money. He was actually reflecting what Australians want.
Yep, I think you're right. James, Terry, thank you so much for your time.